السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, and may the peace and the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon His Messenger Muhammad and all the prophets before him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and all their families, and companions, and their followers. And may Allah accept us among their true followers, inshallah. Good to see everyone on a blessed day of Friday, officially actually Saturday in the Islamic calendar, but we're extending the day, alhamdulillah ta'ala, and we're meeting at one of the best places, the house of worship, one of Allah's homes and houses, the masjid. What I was asked to talk about briefly is maybe the history of ISIS itself. How did it originate? How did it come to existence? So I'll go briefly, and I'm going to talk about some of its factors, and I'm hoping, inshallah, during the Q&A, we'll hear more from you, and I will be able to elaborate more on some of these items. So if something comes up and you think it didn't answer what's on your mind, or you need an elaboration, or even a challenge, feel free to do so, but after, inshallah, during the Q&A. So Daesh, as most Arabs like to call it, because we don't want to give it the privilege of calling it Islamic State, because it's not, as Sheikh Muzammil said, neither Islamic nor a state. Obviously, don't call them Daesh if you run into them in Syria or Iraq, because they'll kill you. They don't like that term. But Daesh originated actually back in 1999. It started as a group called Jama'at al-Tawheed wal-Jihad under Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, if you remember hearing that. At that time they were not very active. They were trying to have their presence, but they were not that active. They didn't become active until 2004, right after the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, when they were able to organize locally in Iraq through the areas that were occupied, and especially in the Sunni areas, by playing on the feeling of grievances of many Arab Sunnis in that area, especially those who were part of the regime, or those who were not, but suddenly felt they're being excluded or marginalized. So in 2006, they declared the Islamic State of Iraq in 2006. Obviously nobody recognized it. They didn't really have a functional state. And by the day, actually at that time, they initially pledged allegiance, and about 2004, when they first organized there, pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda, to the Al-Qaeda group, which was based in Afghanistan or Pakistan, in some of these cases. So what happened is, in 2006, they declared their state, the Islamic State of Iraq, but they became more and more vicious, more and more barbaric, to the point where they started losing the support of people who even they claimed they were supporting. Even when they were saying we're doing this on behalf of the Sunni Arabs in the area, even these people started rejecting Al-Qaeda and rejecting this group. And actually, by 2008, 2009, they almost disappeared. They were more in hiding. They were doing hit-and-run tactics, but no presence, no actual state. That continued to be the case until 2011. In March 2011, the Syrian Revolution for Freedom started, along with the Arab revolutions or the Arab Spring. In 2011, as the regime started losing ground in parts of Syria, some of the people of the Islamic State of Iraq started coming and crossing the border. Syria and Iraq share a large border. And mainly from the Anbar area, from the western part of Iraq, which is the Sunni area, to also the western part of Syria. As Al-Qaeda groups, or these groups, started coming to Syria, they started settling in the larger Sunni populations area, and also keeping in mind there's a lot of grievances against the regime of Assad, of course. So at that time, while many people in Syria disliked what they teach and what they preach, and we can talk to people, they'll tell you we hate their guts, but they're good fighters. So people welcome their ability, the fact that they came into their areas and repelled the regime. And the regime was engaged in all sorts of atrocities. Rape, killing, murder, torture, So at that time, there was a helpless community, and they found these people coming from Iran, and actually many of them were foreigners joining them. So there were Moroccans, Pakistanis, Uzbeks, Iraqis, Saudis, Yemenis, in the hundreds initially, coming to the aid of their Syrian brethren, basically. That was their argument. We're here to defend you. They were one of the smallest groups among many of the people fighting there. According, there were the Free Syrian Army and its various groups. There was the local group of Al-Qaeda called Jabhat al-Nusra. ISIS, and it wasn't called ISIS yet, was the smallest group of all. In 2013, they changed their name into the Islamic State in Iran and Sham. That's where the ISIS come from. Or the Levant. Sham means the Levant area. The Sham means Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and part of Iraq. So they declared their name, they changed their name, and that's when actually we started hearing the name in 2013. The actual name was Jaysh al-Dawla, basically the army of the Dawla of Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, Syria, Greater Syria. Slowly but surely they started growing in number and growing in size and effectiveness. There are many factors that I will mention very briefly. In 2014, they declared their separation, their split from Al-Qaeda, because there was some fight between them and Jabhat al-Nusra, which was the local Qaeda in Syria, and they were becoming much more brutal than Al-Qaeda could ever be. And imagine that Al-Qaeda was issuing statements condemning acts by ISIS. So just kind of visualize how bad they are. So the Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda, was actually issuing statements condemning, he said, that's way too violent. That's way too brutal. That's not how we do things. So imagine if Al-Qaeda was criticizing them, that tells you how much off they are to begin with from Islam. And that's when they declared independence from Al-Qaeda in 2014. In actually June 2014, they declared the Khilafah. They said, we're no longer the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham. We are now the Islamic State. We are the Islamic State. We are the Khilafah. And every Muslim, under our rule or outside, should declare bay'ah, allegiance to that state. If you haven't done that, you are sinning according to them. It's a joke. But this is how much they live in their out of reality. I mean, they're completely out of reality. They're living in their own world without understanding of anything that is happening, the actual needs of people, the actual religious background that Sheikh Muzammil just talked about, how people feel, all the brutality you can imagine that we're committing. And by the way, when we mention ISIS, it is important to remember, as bad as it is to attack anyone outside of the Muslim world, their main targets have been Muslims. And to be more specific, because I don't want people to think this is, sectarian. Actually, most of their targets, most of their people killed have been Sunnis. Sunnis from the Syrian and the Iraqi area. Basically, any tribe that refuses to give allegiance is considered to be, because they engage in takfir, is an apostate. So any tribe that lives in the region that they control and refuses to give bay'ah, they consider them to be part of Ridda. They basically apostate from Islam. They committed apostasy from Islam, so they are legitimate to be killed. All their men. Actually, one tribe in the area of their resort in Syria, 600 men were slaughtered on video, one by one. All Sunnis and Arabs. So nobody can think this is just a sectarian thing. There's actually a cuckoo people at all levels. 600 people were slaughtered on video. You can get the video. The Shaitan tribe. Actually, secret burial areas were found just around 2 weeks ago that included children, 60 children, including people 11, 12, 13-year-old boys from the Shaitan family who were massacred by this group because that tribe, the head of the tribe, refused to give allegiance to that group. So what are some of the factors behind its growth? And I will go very briefly, inshallah. One is, their mentality is Khawarij. And we'll talk more about that in detail. But this is so that we can link things to history. First of all, is the existence of repression and dictatorships in the region. When you suppress people, when you take people's freedom away from them, it creates a fertile ground for people to be easily recruited into these kind of sick ideologies. Because people feel helpless, they feel hopeless, and when someone comes to them and sells them something that's too good to be true, and it is too good to be true, it's like, we're going to do this, and we're going to liberate our world, and we are going to establish this, it is appealing to young people. A lot of their followers are young men, usually 18 to 40, 45 years old, so this is the age of passion, age of a lot of energy, and, you know, again, they're jobless. These people are unemployed because of the corruption in that region, in the Middle East. A lot of these people don't have a job. There's a lot of political repression. There's a lot of repression against Islamic practices, specifically. In much of that part of the world, there's an attack on the freedom to practice Islam. So a lot of these people who are religious or recently religious feel that these governments are bad, they're not the solution to my problems, whether it's political, religious, or economic. So they look for ways out, and unfortunately these ways out are the extremes. And they're pushed into the extreme. This is not to justify what they're doing, by the way. I don't want anyone to think this is a justification, but this is an understanding of why they exist, so we can deal with the problem from its root, to make sure no one gets attracted to this type of perversion. Also, another factor is the sectarianism in the region. There's obviously sectarianism, and specifically since they appeal to the Sunni side, there's sectarianism with the government of Iraq, which excluded a lot of the Sunnis and was controlled by some of the very sectarian groups, supported by a very sectarian regime in Iran. Also the regime in Syria, the Assad regime, is much more even sectarian and brutal. So it created a lot of grievances with many people and regions, making them susceptible to the message and the appeal of sick groups such as Al-Qaeda and then ISIS. There's also an exploitation, support, funding that happened to ISIS. There was some support coming from various Arab intelligence agencies. Some Arab intelligence agencies which have their own war with the Islamic movement in the region, especially the political one. So in order to counter that, they started supporting the more extreme ones to make sure that people join them and create a counterbalance. Whether it's Saudi intelligence, UAE intelligence, definitely there was some Arab intelligence coming and funding, and this is a fact that funding that has been received by them at the early age, especially in 2013, the whole year of 2013, coming into Syria to fund them. There was also some indirect support from the Assad regime, because Assad realized that when they grow, these extremist groups grow, he would look good. The Assad regime would say, tell the world, listen, it's either me or these terrorists. And basically he would be the lesser of two evils. So he was allowing ISIS to actually invade bases and get weapons from various locations, and then suddenly they became much stronger than any other rebel group in Syria. And that's when they started. For the first year, actually, in 2013, they did never attack a single time the Assad regime. All their attacks were on the Syrian rebels, to take ground from them and take territory. It's only when there were no more rebels in their territory that ISIS started having confrontation with the Assad regime, and that was only in 2014. Also, another factor in the growth of such groups is the failure of US policies. We cannot deny that. Whether from the beginning, the immoral and illegal invasion of Iraq. Yes, Saddam Hussein was a bad regime, dictatorial, repressive regime, but the answer to that would not have been through an immoral, illegal invasion that actually destroyed every structure of government in Iraq, created sectarianism between Sunnis and Shia, between Arabs and Kurds, and the result is clear. Before 2003, there wasn't a single cell of Al-Qaeda that existed in Iraq. Not a single one. It's only after the invasion that Iraq became the biggest place for the growth and the organization of Al-Qaeda and other groups later on. By the way, one of the pretexts of the invasion of the war was the attack. The invasion was the mass destruction, but also that Iraq was responsible for 9/11, which both were wrong. The reality is, this is what we're dealing with. It's U.S. foreign policy, unfortunately, that creates this mess. Also, the support for dictatorships in the Middle East, which creates the suppression we talked about. There's also the inaction in face of a lot of criminal and brutality of the Assad regime. The U.S. continues to say we stand by the Syrian people, but not doing enough to support the moderates. allowing the extremists to grow and become a problem, a worldwide problem now, and the unconditional support that Israel's occupation continues to get and its apartheid regime that creates frustration, grievances in the region, making people susceptible to extremist messages rather than dealing with injustices in a fair way. So these are some of the issues that, inshallah, we can elaborate more during the Q&A. Jazakumullah khair, assalamu alaikum.
Again, representing CARE, and we appreciate those insights because definitely learning the history and the background kind of gives everybody a general understanding, and then definitely to understand that this terrorist problem is really affecting everybody. It's quite universal. So definitely something all of us should be concerned and try to understand. Next, we'd like to invite Brother Salam al-Bariyati, and please forgive me that I did forget to introduce his title. He's currently the president of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, MPAC, which works effortlessly to, again, create awareness about Muslims in America. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'll be very short because I think Dr. Siddiqui Hassan has already done an excellent job in providing you background about the situation. And we're also very eager to engage in discussion. I'm here more actually to listen to what people have to say, and then have an exchange of ideas on this issue rather than just giving a lecture. And having said that, we basically have three issues that we should be thinking about as we take the information and the analysis and say, what does it mean for us here? Why is this important? And I get this a lot. Why do we have to talk about this? They have the KKK and they have terrorists in every group. Why is it that we have to talk about this? And I'll give you one simple answer. Our children. Our children are confused. They go on the internet and they see this. And they talk about it at school, and they watch it on the news. And if we aren't prepared to talk about it, then our children will be confused. And believe you me, there are young Muslims that are leaving Islam even when they don't announce that they're leaving Islam. Because it's just too much baggage for them to carry. And unless we provide them an alternative that is grounded in Islam, then we will suffer more and more young Muslims who will either live the dual life. They'll come and they'll pray, but then when they're out there, yeah, my mom and dad, they're Muslims, but all they do is pray. In other words, they're not proud of being Muslim. They will hide their Islam. So, our children, that is the most important reason why we have to talk about this issue. And even when we ourselves are struggling with how to talk about it, we should keep talking until we gain clarity on the issue. So let me just provide 3 points, as I said, on this issue. Number 1, Islam stands for freedom. When we say La ilaha illallah, there is no God but the one God, that means no human being can force me to believe what he believes. There is no compulsion in religion. La ikraha fid din. And when Muslim countries have religious police, and they have takfir, and they have the ideology of compulsion, then why are we surprised that there are groups like ISIS that take it to the extreme of violence now? So there's a root problem in this ideology of compulsion, and we as American Muslims have the opportunity to declare freely and openly and without any apology, this is why we are Muslim, because Islam stands for freedom. And that freedom is for men and women, that freedom is for Muslim and non-Muslim, that freedom is for young and old. It is freedom that we bring to our society. Number 2, Islam stands for protecting life. As Dr. Siddiq will tell us, the first goal of Sharia is what? To secure and develop the right to life. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came to Medina, the first order of business was that Medina became a sanctuary, so anyone that came into Medina was protected by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Muslims. And when they